Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
Religion can be seen in a couple different ways. I think one of them is that of the true believer who says, well, the problem with meritocracy is we all deserve nothing or worse, and that's why you throw yourself at the feet of God and beg for healing or mercy, what have you. The other view is, well, religion is good because it kind of gives everyone something to do, and it's structure and prevents people from getting confused or lost. And who really cares whether it's true or not? Who really cares what's going on inside people's consciences? What really matters is just kind of getting everyone to adopt the same rituals so that we have this sense of togetherness and we stay busy, which is kind of the pattern of thinking that the internet itself imposes on us, I think. Everything on the internet tends to drift or converge on filler, just sort of content that is just chummed out there every day for people to consume. And whatever it is that is your heart's delight, well, the internet has a channel for that, has a 24/7 feed, and you can just, dip your head in the stream of whatever it is that you care about most and just participate in the ritual of consuming that feed.
Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at The American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of The American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. And it's happened. We made it just under the gun, January 24. So shortly before the end of the month, we've all managed to get on a podcast together before the first month of the year is up. I am joined by the whole gang: editor James Poulos, managing editor Seth Barron, and publisher and president Ryan Williams. Great to see and or hear from you guys. And it's always a little weird to say I'm excited about our topics on any given week, because it's not like the news is so sunny and thrilling all the time. But I am kind of excited to discuss. I think we've got some juicy topics here today, and I'm interested to know what you guys think of them. But we wanted to actually kick things off with a little victory lap. I think it's fair to take one after this New York Times piece that came out about us. First of all, it seems that we live rent-free in the heads of the New York Times editorial staff. This in itself delights me. But our most recent, you might say hit piece, you might say advertisement in the Times, has been particularly delicious to watch. It's called, well, it's always hard to tell with these big splashes. This is a long piece and they always give like 5 different titles, but the major title is "America is Under Attack Inside the Anti-DEI Crusade." That America is under attack is in quotes, of course, although that's our position as it's being represented here in the Times, the Claremont Institute's position. Because what this piece effectively does, as far as I can tell, is give us credit for spearheading the anti-DEI movement, the backlash. Here's a paragraph from early on. Long before Claudine Gay resigned Harvard's presidency this month under intense criticism of her academic record, her congressional testimony about campus anti-Semitism, and her efforts to promote racial justice, conservative academics and politicians had begun making the case that the decades-long drive to increase racial diversity in America's universities had corrupted higher education, gathering strength from a backlash against Black Lives Matter and fueled by criticism that doctrines such as critical race theory had made colleges engines of progressive indoctrination. The eradication of DEI programs has become both a cause and a message, suffusing the American right. Y'all can't see me, but I'm doing like a Tony Soprano face and giving 2 thumbs up right here. That all sounds great to me. And the New York Times has previously referred to us as the nerve center of these sorts of movements. Now they've got some emails where they try to present various Claremont fellows and affiliates in as negative a light as possible. I did not know this, but if you're emailing from a .edu email address, your emails are vulnerable to a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request. So the more you know, good to be aware of. Although in this case, it doesn't seem to have hurt us too terribly much, especially because, and this is the most interesting tidbit to me that I would like us to talk about. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of this piece, which takes a while because it is long, and you click on read the comments, you will find a very interesting series of discussions. The top comment recommended by 2,464 people is from Rollo Tomasi. And it says framing the anti-DEI movement as a purely right-wing obsession is inaccurate at best / misleading at worst. A sizable slice of moderate America, including many traditional lefties, in quotes, are appalled by the new progressive orthodoxy and all of its illogical and many times illiberal arguments. That right-wing hucksters are involved in bringing down DEI programs is hardly newsworthy at this point. The more interesting article would have been an open examination of the left's own views of DEI. This would require dissociating the individual terms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, from the goals and methods of DEI programs as they operate within organizations. Well, my fellow right-wing hucksters, it seems we have some strange bedfellows. The enemy of my race-obsessive DEI apparatchik is my friend, ? What do you think about all of this, and are you as tickled by it as I am?
Very tickled. I just wanted to clarify one thing, Spencer, which is a specific segment of .edu emails are subject to FOIA,
Oh,
and that
thank
is
you.
especially state institutions. So yeah, we've been working on this issue for a long time, and the Times claims they got 5,000 emails on this topic, and the way they do that is that on some of these, maybe one of our colleagues at his or her state email. I mean, usually they'll use different emails because they're not exactly doing school business, of course, but doing side job work for the Claremont Institute was one vulnerability. And then I think, we often work with academics at other institutions who are upset at and object to the rapid rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What Scott Yenner and I called in our rebuttal piece, or just not really a rebuttal, it was kind of a victory lap piece, but wanted to explain what we're all about to those who were just coming to our website. The diversity persuasion, that's Scott's phrase. I think it's pretty good. It covers all of this stuff, which has been the obsession of the Academy for at least the last 40 years or so. Anyway, I just want to put, folks' mind at ease. If you're a normal donor to the Claremont Institute, you will never find yourself in the New York Times. We are not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. And, I think actually across the movement, I'm quietly telling anyone who asks, we all kind of knew this, but everyone needs to be more diligent about it. Email operational security has to be at the top of your mind, because the media, and in many ways, certain pieces of the regime would like nothing less to embarrass you. Now, there were some flippant comments and some emails which they wanted to make a bunch of hay out of. Nothing really that embarrassing, and nothing that really will do us any damage. But private email shouldn't be national news. What should be news is our public work on policy and on the issue. And I think that's the main takeaway from the piece for most people. And so for that reason, we take a victory lap. I think I said this about that Elizabeth Zorofsky essay in the New York Times Magazine about us last summer. Spencer referenced one phrase from it about us being a nerve center of the American right. And that piece was pretty fair. Elizabeth's a fair journalist, certainly doesn't share our politics, but did a lot of work, actually read a lot to understand us. It's a longer piece. I can't say as much for Nicholas Confessore, the author of this Sunday New York Times piece, because it was sloppy in places, got some things wrong. And actually, in the case of one donor who's operating in this space, who is named in the piece, he was reporting hearsay about what that guy may or may not have said to a college president. And Confessore never reached out to any of the parties involved, I don't think, as far as I've heard from people who would know, to try to confirm that. So in other words, it's sloppy journalism. But I'll just finish by saying, yeah. What's up,
Oh, I
Spencer?
was just going to say, I just a footnote, Ryan. We should say to our donors, if you're a regular donor to the Claremont Institute, you will never find yourself in the New York Times unless you want to. In which case, DM us and
Right,
let's
that's
talk.
right. Yeah, if you are interested in a guerrilla communications strategy, we could work on it. No, it's we're getting a bunch of free press, and it's interesting. It's just indicative of the two. This old line from Scott Adams. He launched in 15 or 16. Americans are watching two movies, and it's kind of like that. I mean, the Times, a segment of the Times readership and the Times editorial staff is incredulous that anyone would criticize diversity, equity, inclusion, or quote unquote be against anti-discrimination laws, because I guess they either take these words at face value without any understanding of what's behind them, or they just agree with the project, and because it's the latest evolution of modern progressive liberalism, it must be right and on the right side of history. So to object to it is ipso facto, if not evil, then misguided, it's stupid, pernicious, whatever. So the way these are reported, people read these pieces in very different ways. And so I was heartened to see that a lot of the Times readership, at least online that comments, was seeing through the nonsense and seeing through the doublespeak. And Scott, in my piece at the American Mind, I think it's called Why the Anti-Discrimination Regime Must Be Dismantled. Go check it out. The point is really diversity, equity, and inclusion, equity in general as a concept, affirmative action you could lump in there. All of these, first academic and now political and journalistic terms, hide what's really going on, which is after decades and decades of Jim Crow, after the civil rights movement supposedly fixes it all with the 1964 Civil Rights Act, almost immediately the courts and the bureaucratic agencies get after the new civil rights regime in which we live, which is not a return to the colorblindness that's promised in the Declaration, where you judge people as individuals and not by group identity or skin color, but rather just trading one set of discriminatory practices for another. And so we've talked about this sort of ad infinitum on the podcast, but that's really what's going on. Our current quote unquote civil rights regime is a racial caste system of sorts that doles out benefits and privileges to a certain class, which are, the kind of oppressed or formerly oppressed classes or identities, and imposes costs and penalties, sometimes soft, sometimes small, sometimes unseen. Maybe you don't get hired or promoted. Maybe you're ditched out of the pool of applicants at some university if you have the wrong skin color, but doles out costs and penalties to the former oppressors or the current oppressors. So it's in many ways un-American. It's against the founding principles that they're in their truest sense, and it has just traded one regime of I don't like to use discrimination. It's too broad a term because we all, of course, have to discriminate in our lives in all sorts of ways. You discriminate between employers that you're happy at or not. You discriminate between people who give you products. You discriminate between which school you're going to choose. You make discerning judgments about all kinds of things every day. And when those judgments just happen to overlap with certain group demographics, they're per se racist or whatever. And that should be a category that's just rejected. So that's why we work on this. It also, on top of just being unjust and un-American, it leads to lots of incompetence and mediocrity. So when you're not more or less trying to have people ascend through the job ranks or go to colleges or excel in their fields based on doing the best work, and at the margins, there's always judgment calls in there, of course. But if you flip that over and say, no, we're going to prioritize something like skin color or identity for promotion, hiring, et cetera, then you're going to get a lot of mediocrity across different groups in different ways. Witness
That's
recent
how you
difficulties
end up with planes
on airlines, maybe. Yeah, that's right. Planes falling out of the sky. Luckily, no plane has fallen out of the sky yet, although Dora has flown off. Now, I don't know if it's directly attributable to diversity. Boeing seems to have a lot of other problems, but anyway, I think we'll see more and more of this. So that's why we're against it. It also leads to terrible education, tendentious and propagandistic education. So it's going to lead our society and our country into a ditch. And along the way, lots of people who need not suffer and die will. And I should just finish with a loving nod to the boomers. It is also kind of just reshuffled socialism or communism in a way, with the categories now not class but race, and with all the machinery that was used or has been used and is used to advance the general kind of left-leaning socialist progressive agenda just turn towards this issue. So everyone should be against diversity, equity, and inclusion. But first, just go do a little reading and figure out what it means.
Yeah. I mean, we discriminate like who to hire to fix our fence or work on our house, like whether they're super hot or not. Or no, I'm sorry. So that is a joke. Um, anyway, yeah. I mean, this is the. It's interesting to me how this article was constructed because it masquerades as new information about what the Claremont Institute is doing and what it's about. But in fact, it's that information is just a sort of bloated vehicle for people mouthing off in emails, which like nobody even seems to be all that interested, including in the comments by the New York Times comments in like parsing whether that's okay or not. I mean, we're certainly not interested in that, but it was intriguing. And Seth, I think you first brought this to our attention that the commenters, the readers of the New York Times also don't seem all that interested anymore in playing that game.
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. That like the first thing I did after I read the article was look at the comments. And I mean, you can tell a lot about the zeitgeist, I guess, from like the New York Times like half-wit commentariat. And it was interesting to me how I mean the ratio seemed to be 3 or 4 to 1, basically in favor of our position, which is that DEI has gone way too far, that it's essentially un-American, and it's actually illiberal. It violates like liberal tenets, which are, treat everybody like what Martin Luther King said. Okay, let's treat everybody by the content of their character, the work they put in. I mean, I guess real hardcore liberals would be like, we've got to give everybody a step up and make sure that people are starting out at at the same place, and then like let merit show. And if you think about it, like the people who go to college, who read the New York Times, I mean, these are people who are completely wedded to the idea of the meritocracy. Like
Hmm.
their own jobs, everything they've done, they kind of, you know, give themselves some credit. I mean, probably they deserve it. Whatever they have, they've worked for, largely. And it's offensive to people who aren't like, commissars or strict ideologues to say, you didn't build that, in the words of a former president. Ultimately, people don't like that message. And, look at people, there's all kinds of former liberals or people who would say that they're still liberals, like Jonathan Haidt or the Weinstein brothers, or probably Jordan Peterson, people who are like, I mean, essentially, we're all liberals now in the sense that we kind of believe that, okay, all people are equal and have like, great possibilities and so forth. And society should be built to allow people to succeed.
Whoa, well, I must ask
Um,
you to speak for
but
yourself, Mr. Barron. No, no, no. You're right. We
okay,
do all believe
well,
that.
I mean, I guess it depends how you define liberal, but
Yes, we
I'd
do all
say
believe
most of us have this essential, concern at heart, and DEI is a complete inversion of it. And like Ryan just said, it's just socialism or communism reconfigured to empower a knowing class who will get to decide how resources are distributed. So I was glad to see how many of the commenters kind of had common sense on this issue.
And for bonus points, it's not just commenters or people in the replies. Freddie DeBoer, the irascible and thoughtful, but very much, I think it's fair to describe him as a hard left commentator, low these many years, really just took this piece of the woodshed at his Substack. I'll read a little bit of what he had to say and then say a bit after that. The quote is this. Confessori treats all of the described efforts as straightforwardly malign without bothering to really make the case for why. The piece does not really bother advocating for DEI, it makes a remarkably limp attempt at defining what conservatives and others are mad about, and clearly proceeds from the assumption that the majority of its readers will recognize everything that's being described as wicked without argument. That argument, I would argue, being Freddie, is a good example of the profound audience capture that the New York Times has fallen into as it has become a global paper, reliant on subscriptions that come largely from a particular kind of person: urban, extravagantly educated, upwardly mobile, if not already affluent, the type of person who mocks meritocracy on Twitter while enjoying the fruits of their own desperate clawing up the meritocratic ladder. They are not the type who are used to entertaining the possibility that maybe their ideological opponents have a point. And increasingly, the paper seems eager to give them the uncomplicated world they demand to live in. One way of looking at this piece is kind of a checking in on woke religion. Religion can be seen in a couple different ways. I think one of them is that of the true believer who says, well, the problem with meritocracy is we all deserve nothing or worse, and that's why you throw yourself at the feet of God and beg for healing or mercy, what have you. The other view is, well, religion is good because it kind of gives everyone something to do, and it's structure and prevents people from getting confused or lost. And who really cares whether it's true or not? Who really cares what's going on inside people's consciences? What really matters is just kind of getting everyone to adopt the same rituals so that we have the sense of togetherness and we stay busy, which is kind of the pattern of thinking that the internet itself imposes on us, I think. Everything on the internet tends to drift or converge on filler, just sort of content that is just chummed out there every day for people to consume. And whatever it is that is your heart's delight, well, the internet has a channel for that, has a 24/7 feed, and you can just, dip your head in the stream of whatever it is that you care about most and just participate in the ritual of consuming that feed. And it's true, the Times is being sucked toward this kind of vortex along with everything else online. And there is this real feel in this piece and some of the others of just kind of dishing up some more boilerplate, some filler for an audience that has come to expect it, and ultimately doesn't. They're not going to be out in the streets. They're not going to be burning down buildings. They're not going to be participating in lawfare. Probably they're going to be working really hard at their job, like the meritocratic workaholics they are, and want to be able to flip open the Times and read something that's going to make them frown a little bit, but trust that the relevant individuals are fully employed with the ritualistic busy work of persecuting the bad guys who need to be persecuted, and reporting from the field that the battle continues and the baddies are losing just as they were yesterday. That seems to be the level that a lot of internet content is on, and it seems as if the New York Times is going to be no exception.
Yeah, no, that is very well put. And I mean, it was an interesting data point for me also in the ongoing question, whether meritocracy, liberalism, all of the ideas that Seth and Ryan were sort of gesturing toward, whether those still retain any kind of rhetorical oomph or hold on your average, for example, say, Times reader. I mean, the the frame of mind that would endorse DEI really is a different beast altogether from the kind of nice, open-minded liberal who kind of disagrees with us about a lot of things. And now, for I suspect coalitional reasons and even presidential reasons, those two things have been thoroughly conglomerated. And because the sort of extremist DEI racial caste version of things is the most vigorous and energetic activist wing clique within the party, and people with the most time on their hands, most energy for lawfare, also the most sort of messianic fervor, that presents itself as the face of the Times or the coalition that it speaks to or what have you. And people like us are often wondering, well, what about all of those people that basically said, not the color of your skin, but the content of your character? Aren't they sort of appalled by all of this? Are they just being held completely hostage? And I think to some extent, the answer is still yes, but it's nice to see some fight and some oomph from them. I mean, I would argue that this DEI stuff is actually worse than a racial caste system, because racial caste systems, abhorrent and appalling as they are, have a kind of predetermined structure and hierarchy in place rather than the arbitrary will of whatever the 5 minutes of internet you currently live on happen to dictate. Whereas DEI is so unmoored from any principle or reality that it simply anoints and appoints people who are most politically appropriate for it at any given moment to elevate over others in this kind of random and constantly churning eternal revolution. All of that is disgusting. If we're the leaders of the charge against it, then I say tally ho. I mean, that's fantastic that we should be viewed in that way. And I'm glad that it's not only conservative firebrands that think it would be good if this stuff were rooted out like a cancer from every American institution. Okay. That's quite enough of that, I think. Once again, the piece can be found on the Times, but you can also go check out, actually probably should just go directly to AmericanMind.org to check out Scott Yenner's, Ryan Williams's response to this latest hot steaming pile of garbage from the Times. We should talk about New Hampshire, I think, probably. There has been another primary. Trump has won it. Nobody is surprised. There are some interesting data points as before to discuss. So Nikki Haley is the only person left besides Trump in this race for the Republican nomination. Since we talked last, DeSantis has backed out and has endorsed Trump. Haley remains in and says she will be clinging to the bitter end. But although she has slightly outperformed her polling, it seems, in this latest showing, it's not altogether a thrilling prospect for her going forward. Our friend Jeremy Carl has another great thread in which he breaks down some of the most interesting data points here. And he points out that this really was as good as it's going to get for Haley. I mean, we've got Nevada, we've got South Carolina coming up, and Haley may have hopes invested in building some momentum, but there are several aspects of New Hampshire that would seem to be favorable to Haley and probably account for her greater than expected success. These include the secular populace of the state, whereas Trump really does well with evangelicals, walks away with them in most contexts. New Hampshire is a state that tends to field a more sort of secular electorate. That didn't push her over the edge. Haley did well with latecomers, late deciders, which is sort of interesting, but there will be fewer and fewer of those going forward for obvious reasons. So not looking fantastic for Haley, and certainly the race from where I stand seems all but over. I mean, it seems like Trump is basically the nominee here. Also bears mentioning that there was a Democratic primary in New Hampshire and that it had some sort of amusing and outlandish features. Biden and his administration and the Democrat party had decided that New Hampshire would not be the first state to vote in its primary because it wasn't diverse enough, although probably because Biden wasn't as excited about it as he was about, say, South Carolina. But New Hampshire just sort of went forward with it. I think it's part of their state constitution, or it's on their books that they have to be the first. So they just proceeded, and Biden nevertheless won against a sort of weak challenger via write-in votes. So, the contrasts are sharpening. Representative Dean Phillips did not really make a dent, even though Biden was technically not on the ballot. Sure does look like we're in for a Trump-Biden race. But what parts of this, if any, struck you guys as worth discussing and considering?
There was a piece in Politico 2 days ago, maybe, flagged by Ross Douthat on Twitter, or X. Sorry, Elon. We just can't quit the Twitter, or calling it Twitter. Flagging this Politico, not that long. I mean, a reported Politico piece, which was the product of a reporter sitting with a New Hampshire voter who, a month, 6 weeks ago, was telling this reporter sat with this guy for maybe 3 hours total over the course of maybe a few weeks of checking in during the process. And he was warming up to Haley maybe 6 weeks ago or so, or 2 months, could vote for her, sick of the corrupt state, thought January 6th was basically a bunch of patriots. Seeing the guy in his sort of history, he's a veteran and a decent guy. I doubt he was celebrating any breaking of windows or vandalism, just thinking that mostly it was people protesting a corrupt government. And by the time that the reporter talked to him last week, he was like, I'm voting for Trump. He voted for Obama twice. Also, there are a lot of these people out there, 2-time Obama voters and now maybe 3-time Trump voters. Very interesting phenomenon. Middle class guy, has a family. He looked about 60, and his verdict on Haley was she just says whatever she needs to say. She's untrustworthy. His cumulative impression, obviously, over the last 2 months was that she's duplicitous, unserious, and basically in hock to the ruling elites. And I don't find too many reasons to disagree with him on that judgment. And he said of Trump, look, I mean, the guy's a womanizer and has all his flaws, but it's ridiculous what they're doing, indicting him. It's a totally corrupt system. We need Trump because we need someone to break the system, to fix the system. I don't know if we mentioned it a couple weeks ago on the podcast, but there's this one, I wasn't the first one to notice it, but there's this wonderful quote from a Iowa caucus goer that Trump is our David and our Goliath. Like there's, this is why he's so attractive to so many people across America who view a lot of the things we've been talking about on this podcast for years, which is the corruption of our ruling class, its detachment from popular control, its contempt for normal Americans, and the economic slide with inflation and everything else, and the border crisis of the Biden administration have just exacerbated those feelings. And the powers that be, both center right all the way to the left, continue to treat lots of normal Americans with contempt, continue to treat their views about how the economy is not helping them as, they must just be making it up, or they're so stuck in partisanship that they can't appreciate that the economy is awesome. I mean, this has been the narrative from major media outlets all the way down to local ones, and from our vaunted elites. So they should not be surprised when what happened in 2016 and maybe happened, but a little attenuated or whatever in 2020 is now sort of roaring back again. It's probably going to happen in 24 again, which is all bets are off. We're embroiled in this weird populist moment. Trump is a charismatic and attractive figure to millions and millions of Americans. And I think honest assessors of him have to admit a variety of things, which is he's exciting, entertaining, and hilarious often. He's not really like any other politician anyone's seen in a long time. He kind of has 9 lives. He's tough and determined in the face of political pressure and financial pressure and business pressure on his businesses and criticism across the whole transatlantic West that would have melted any lesser man long ago. Trump's huge ego and narcissism is kind of benefits him in this regard. So anyway, Trump is just the most interesting political phenomenon to come around in American politics in decades. And that continues to be the case. And I think it's not surprising that this primary was pretty much, not even just New Hampshire, but this whole primary was over pretty much when it started. And Haley, I'll just finish with this. And Haley, who, for the medium information consumer of American politics, and I come across a lot of these folks all the time, they kind of like her. She presents well. She did a good job at the UN under Trump. She's a former governor. She's articulate. She seems sensible. But you talk to people who've been around Haley in South Carolina politics, and they say she's unprincipled and it's just raw ambition. And then you have in her corner, and the New Hampshire voting was a sign of this, in her corner is that old crew that brought us a bunch of failed wars and democracy projects across the world, coupled with a kind of blinkered, I should say, undeserved allegiance to kind of corporate interests in America, even as all those interests have gone way left with the zeitgeist, as it has gone way left over the last 30 years. So you saw it on the trans issue arguing with DeSantis in one of these debates. I mean, Haley knows what she has to say, but her instincts are kind of keep the state out of it. Libertarians don't really believe in the culture war. They're sort of 30 years behind. And then you couple that with her attachment to a certain neoconservative, unrealistic view of foreign policy, and an unwillingness to buck corporate interests, even when they're participating in destroying the country and I mean, what's to like in her candidacy? Not much.
Really dreadful. And the Trump thing continues to show, I would say at least, that the factionalism in the U.S. goes all the way up to the top. There are just conflicts over the super elite about how hard to floor the pedal on technology, how hard to floor the pedal on wokeness, how just how global should globalism really be? Is China an adversary? Is China a strategic partner? Should we merge with China? Should we overthrow the Russian government and break it into 100 people? There isn't a single consolidated strategic plan, and I think that's just the consequence of the original strategic plan of combining neoliberalism and neoconservatism into a technologically powered globalizing force. They tried that and it didn't work, and it has failed in spectacular fashion. Not so badly that the whole thing blew up and they've recognized the error of their ways, but badly enough that there is not consensus on what to do. And the reports from the World Economic Forum, even those seem to suggest that there's a decent chunk of the top tier that's having second thoughts and thinking for maybe how to hedge their bets or prepare for pendulum to swing back in a way. I'm not really getting the sense that the elites are in lockstep on these things. There's a struggle for power. There's some uncertainty and doubt. It's a pretty messy state of affairs, and that plays to Trump. Even if still a large share of the elite very much would like to throw the kitchen sink at him and maybe hit him this time.
I agree with what everybody said. I think it's interesting. It sort of reminds me of what we were talking about in the other segment, how the New York Times wrote this whole article about how Claremont is against DEI, but they didn't make a positive case for DEI. Similarly, there's no positive case being made for Biden or for anybody who opposes Trump. Just a few minutes ago, I looked at the joebiden2024.com website, which is the official campaign website. And it has tabs for donate, volunteer, stuff like that. It doesn't at any point describe Biden's agenda or his plans for what he would like to do if he's reelected. Nowhere. It doesn't have anything about that. All it has is a video about Jan 6 and the soul of America, that sort of thing. I mean, Trump's website has a whole Agenda 47 section with all, his plans. So it seems like they just want to point to Trump and say, look how many times he's been indicted. But I think the American people are even kind of like, well, yeah, but you indicted him, right? I mean, it's like, so what? People aren't really buying that. Now this might be going a bit too far, but I don't know if you caught Jamie Dimon on CNBC last week saying, look, there's plenty of reasons why people would want to vote for Trump. I mean, he's probably not going to, but it's absurd to just say anyone who's voting, who likes Trump is a moral cretin. He's like, look, his foreign policy was okay. He was right on China. He did a bunch of things that were good. The panel just was nonplussed. They were completely like shaken to have Jamie Dimon defending Trump. I suspect that there's probably a lot of people who are kind of thinking, looking at the border, looking at, inflation and a lot of things, who are like, well, looking at the wars that are going on. One final thing about New Hampshire and the Republican, there's no never Trumpers anymore, right? I mean, they've all left.
Right.
I supposedly, I mean, they should have. So
they were constantly threatening to, yeah.
They were constantly threatening to, and I assume, what are they hanging around for? If there still are any. So at least he's clarified things.
That's definitely
So
true.
it should be
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, you sort of feel like I think Ryan was sort of suggesting this that Nikki Haley, one reason why she's endured, despite the fact that she was not initially as appealing or exciting to some people as, say, Ron DeSantis, who seemed initially like the front runner, is that she did at least represent a strain of thought among Republicans. It turns out it's not the dominant strain of thought. It might even be a dying or evanescent strain of thought, but she does embody, whether instinctually or in a calculated way, uh, like the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal. I mean, not to knock that paper, which has great writers, but this sort of hawkish military position coupled with free market maximalism coupled with the kind of social libertarianism that is a form of conservative thought that, at least for now, is simply not gaining traction anymore in the way that it used to. And as James is saying, under our current conditions, like, things look good for Trump. Meanwhile, yeah, the Biden thing, I mean, Biden, I think, said something to the effect of Trump's going to be the nominee now. And so the MAGA domestic extremist parties have, or wing of the party has totally taken hold. And I think he's going to try to present this as the total collapse of the Republican Party, that it has simply forfeited its legitimacy once and for all. And now the party itself will cease to be a valid player in American politics. But I don't think that's going to work. I mean, I keep listening to these lefty podcasts and stuff where people will say, I just don't get it. Like, why don't the American people realize how good the economy is? It's like inflation is only at a 10-year high, not a 20-year high. I mean, I'm making this up, but it really does start to feel like, why aren't people thinking what we tell them to think anymore? And yeah, it's just manifestly, whether you are a dyed in the wool kind of blue voter or a skeptic or an independent, like, it just won't wash anymore to make the argument that you'd have to be crazy to vote for Trump because of Biden, because of everything that's going on under Biden, both domestically and overseas. Gonna be interesting. We're certainly, the whole thing is hardening to a point, as Seth indicated. And you mentioned the border, which we have to now talk about. We got to talk about this thing that's going on in Texas with Governor Greg Abbott and this standoff between him and the federal government. So, if you haven't been following this, it's only recently started to make big headlines, but it's been going on for a while. In Texas, the state Senate has put forward and now signed, Abbott has signed into law a law, SB 4, which in its content, I mean, effectively just says that the laws which are currently our federal laws about not crossing the border illegally stand and will be enforced. I mean, it's presented as eliminating sanctuary cities, but what that really means is just, the law is the law and we're not going to not enforce it. But who does the enforcing is what's kind of at issue here, because Abbott has effectively, and this state of Texas more broadly, has effectively taken matters into its own hands, arguing that the federal government, the executive branch of the federal government, has failed in its responsibility to enforce the law at the border, and it's resulting in a crisis, which we have covered at length on this podcast, so people probably don't need us to go over it. But now there genuinely is kind of a standoff taking place between the state of Texas and the federal government. Supreme Court has ruled 5-4 that SB 4 is, I guess, effectively can't be enforced because it's a usurpation of what the Supreme Court has already said is the federal government's responsibility and authority, which is to enforce immigration law, because the border has to be the border everywhere. But Governor Abbott has issued a statement effectively saying, no, the constitutional crisis was already underway. The first line of the statement is, the federal government has broken the compact between the United States and the states. The executive branch of the United States has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting states, including immigration on the books, laws on the books right now. So the argument on the left is this represents a rebellion, an insurrection, a constitutional crisis. The argument from Abbott, who does not seem to be backing down, is the Biden administration has already instigated a constitutional crisis by failing in its responsibilities and effectively nullifying the laws that are, in fact, on the books about who can and can't legally enter this country. So the latest in an ongoing, and I think in some ways existential struggle over the nature of the border, the nature of our regime. Where do you guys see this going?
Well, I do like the invocation of Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 by the state of Texas, which you mentioned, Spencer. Yeah, it's we should ask our friend John Yu this. I'm sure he knows it, which is how often have state governors invoked among other things, the supremacy clause of the Constitution and or Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3 with each other to enforce federal law. Now, I just think it's interesting, and I think it was pretty good of Abbott. The statement he released was quite good. I think this is really all that he can do at this point, short of flagrantly violating federal law or like detaining federal CPB officers before they cut razor wire or something like that. So this is a classic Federalist showdown. And the thing that Abbott has going for him, among other things, is that most of the American public are with him. I mean, at least it's been a while since I looked at the exact polls, but maybe if you ask them, should he be able to put up razor wire, you get a more polarizing decision, especially if you couple it with some of the sob stories of people, getting cut by the razor wire or drowning because of it. But if you ask people generally, how's the border? I mean, it's one of the central crises in their top 3 things that are wrong with America in supermajorities. So it's good politics and good policy for Greg Abbott. The border problem has been a problem across multiple administrations for decades. And the feds have been pretty unwilling to do much about it. The Trump administration had some good, innovative ways of solving this problem, remain in Mexico, et cetera. And they were able to get it under some semblance of control. But it's going to be the testing ground, I think, for the foreseeable future of this question of, I think, what we will have, which is a continued lack of will in the national bureaucracy and amongst national elites to do anything about floods of quote unquote migrants across the southern border. Because they're either in an ideological cul-de-sac where they can't really and even make arguments for borders anymore. So you just have to let it continue because it's a humane disaster. Or they're cynical about it and they know that, kind of unrelenting million a year immigration from foreign countries, which are sending up citizens from those countries tend to come up who, they're confident that they can co-opt into the Democratic coalition. This is a recipe for permanent electoral dominance for them. So there's the 2 sides on the left that militate against them really doing anything about this or anything other than just kind of talking well about it and doing a little something, but really quietly continuing to encourage it. And so good for Abbott. Let governors in other border states follow suit, and frankly, let red state governors across the country start pushing the envelope in other ways, like say deporting illegals from their state. I mean, this is one of those things where you just have to keep pushing. The only way is through. And it'll be interesting to see what different administrations do against such efforts. And especially as public opinion for the time being, I think can't help but be against this sort of thing, especially as crime, homelessness, housing prices all continue to get pressure, not just in Texas, of course, but across the United States because of this pretty unprecedented volume of illegal entrance into the country. I mean, on the conservative side, 6 to 7 million in just 4 years or so. It's extraordinary. So good for Greg Abbott. He deserves lots of praise for this. And I would argue, or I would submit, every patriot and Americanist and nationalist, it's a big tent of any flavor, should whenever they see a politician doing this sort of thing, they should praise him and encourage him and others like him to do more of it.
Yes, cosign. Obviously, border security is a very important issue. It might not be surprising to hear me say there's an even more important related issue, and that is technology. If the tech lords who are of the social justice, social credit system persuasion have their way, then we need all of this illegal immigration because technology has turned all of the current Americans into kind of communist polyps. They own nothing. They're happy. They're not going to do any work. So we need these warm bodies to kind of go into the machine and make sure that it all runs. That's the argument that's being made already about why we need a massive influx of immigrants or even just migrants, quote unquote. And so it's important that Abbott is flexing some muscle here because Texas, I think, is going to be called upon not just to lead on this issue, but to lead on issues like tech, where the federal government is obviously going way beyond anything resembling its constitutional prerogatives to create that social justice, social credit system, to build that woke supercomputer, and really to ensure that the Constitution stops at tech's edge, that people can't associate freely using basic technology and can't defend their humanity or form of government or way of life using basic technologies. That's what's coming if people can't buy and use high-powered GPUs, can't mine and use Bitcoin unless it's BlackRock lets them. Texas has a unique and really, I think, an indispensable role to play in showing states that that moving in a powerful but constitutional way is possible, that it can be done, that it should be done, and that if enough of the states do this, it's not just going to have local effects, but it's going to have national effects. A little inside baseball. I do not think that Abbott might have been so willing to take on this risk and willing to lead so boldly had Ron DeSantis still been in the race. Those who have been following this kind of the dynamic between these two for a number of years will probably know, if they've gone to enough cocktail parties or whatever. The joke for a while has been, DeSantis will do something, and then 6 to 9 months later, Abbott will do that thing. So if you want to get results in Texas, you got to get them done in Florida first. That dynamic may now be changing, and if it does, that's going to be a huge deal in the party, huge deal on the right. And I think whatever DeSantis chooses to do going forward, a huge deal for America.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bold move on the part of Greg Abbott. I think it's like really necessary. I mean, I would have been surprised if the Supreme Court had gone down any other way. But at the same time, they now it's in the hands of the Biden administration to, I don't know what, arrest Greg Abbott, go in themselves and tear down the barbed wire. I mean, I love listening to what the White House had to say about it, which is like, well, the border agents need access to that area. Why? Well, so they can not protect the border. I mean, it really is a complete abnegation of authority of the law. It should be a violation of the. I mean, it's totally impeachable if this were like a normal society. I mean, it's practically. I mean, I don't know, treason. I mean, to just completely leave the border undefended on the grounds that these people are seeking asylum. They say they're seeking asylum, so there's nothing we can do about it. It's completely insane. I think everybody knows it. The Democrats are going to go completely crazy, quoting Emma Lazarus for the next 10 months. But I don't know. I think it's like a key issue. I mean, what's so bizarre is that, I mean, this was Trump's main issue 10 years, like in 2015 when he started to run. And I guess at the time, the situation wasn't quite this acute. So it was kind of easy to be like, what is he talking about? Building a wall on the border? Well, now it seems like totally obvious why you would need a wall on
Hmm.
the border.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe he was just a decade ahead of time. Maybe finally America has caught up to its
To Donald Trump,
prophet.
to the visionary Donald Trump. Right. Not only does he
Yeah,
David,
maybe.
he's David and Goliath and Nathan all at once. The biblical
Yeah,
prophet of old. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, Abbott's certainly teeing Trump up, that's for sure. Now that Biden is in a
Right.
position of saying, I demand the right to actively not enforce the law. Not simply I'm neglecting this or it's not a priority or what have you, but I insist upon opening the border is kind of what Biden
Well,
now
this
has to
happened in
say.
Arizona. This happened in Arizona too, right? Under
Yeah, yeah.
Obama,
Hmm.
a similar type of thing where Arizona wanted the right to stop people to see if they were
That was
illegals,
show me your
and
papers, right, or something? Was that
yes,
the
yes,
yeah.
yes, and
Right.
the court ruled against them.
They did, and that's one of the sort of that was one of the moments when they, I think, kind of reinforced the federal government's, that it's their duty and their job and also their right to enforce these laws. But at the same time, it did, as you say, put Obama in that position, and the situation was nowhere near as dire then as it is now, or as visually striking even. So especially leading into 2024, I think it might be like it's certainly a tool in Trump's arsenal now to refer to this. And you're right,
Mm.
like it's his signal issue is now one of the defining crises of the moment. Well, much more to come, no doubt, on pretty much all of these topics. But for now, we have to wrap up. And so we are going to invite you, our dear listeners, to read the damn site. We have a website. It's called AmericanMind.org. And every day we put up some of the most interesting and thought provoking conservative commentary, in my opinion. We like to remind you just of a piece or two to check out. You should obviously read everything on there religiously, but I want to recommend in particular a piece called The Road from Damascus by Todd Bentzman. It's a title that I am personally quite proud of. And it's a piece that Bentzman should be enormously proud of because this fellow who's recently just started writing for us, he's a visiting fellow for the Budapest-based Matthias Corvinus Collegium and the author of Overrun, How Joe Biden Unleashed the Greatest Border Crisis in U.S. History, which, plug for our sister publication, the CRB, got a review from Jeremy Carl in the latest issue of Claremont Review of Books. But Bentzman is just a skilled reporter, which is something that still is not always in great supply among conservatives. Somebody that actually goes and gathers original data. Right now, he's traveling what's called the Balkan route that is being taken by a lot of migrants into the EU. And this piece is specifically about an influx of Syrians, which, as Bentzman documents ably and with receipts, was the same thing that happened shortly before the gruesome 2015 terror strikes throughout Europe. So obviously the argument here is not that all Syrians are terrorists, but rather that Syria is a country from which terrorists often originate, and that in moments when people ignore the borders to Europe generally or between European countries, and there are these big influxes of Syrian migrants, there's just a lot of potential for real danger. Also, the fearsome possibility that no one should wish for, that there may be wake up calls here. So sobering piece, but just really well reported and worth your time. The Road from Damascus by Todd Bentzman, up now at the American Mind. Seth, what do you got?
Well, I kind of liked a piece which could almost be considered a companion piece, though it isn't really, by a fellow Eric Bordenkircher called The Lebanese Experiment. Um, he's looking at the question of diversity, equity, inclusion, and one wonders what a society based on that would look like. He says, well, look no further than Lebanon, where apportionment of parliamentary seats and who gets to be president and who gets to be prime minister. These things are all very carefully being counted out, because Lebanon is, it has the Shiites, it has the Maronite Christians, it has the Sunnis. So everything has to be apportioned correctly, which is partially why the country is such a disaster, with Hezbollah, basically a private militia running half the country. The economy fell apart after that port disaster. There's a whole raft of terrible consequences of this system. So it's a good piece, worth reading. The Lebanese Experiment.
Yeah, those pieces go well together. You're right, Seth. James, what do you got?
Well, I will probably leave Ryan with the pick of the litter this week. But Rep. Jim Banks is a star in his own right. So he's got a piece up called A Blow Against Wokeness, the blow being the latest NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, to those who do not speak swamp. It is kind of a compromise bill. There was a lot of nonsense in the original. The House came back with their own version. Representative government ensued, got some W's, got some L's. Banks does, I think, a very good compressed assessment here, calling the balls and the strikes. You can get up to speed on what was shaping up to be a real nightmare before he and some other key House Republicans led on this. So a blow against wokeness, Rep. Jim Banks.
Well worth your time as well. Ryan, what do you got?
Yeah, well, thank you, James. I was, if no one was going to mention Representative Banks's piece, I was going to give it an honorable mention. But you're right. I did want to bring up a piece I thought would be good to commission. Usually I stay blissfully out of the business of the American mind, but occasionally I have a thought that maybe is good. I thought this one was good, so which I reached out to Darren Beatty, old friend of the Claremont Institute, former fellow, former Trump speechwriter, very involved with Revolver News, among other things these days, smart guy. And he's been covering this story of the pipe bomb at January 6th for a long time. And I thought, Darren's done a bunch of good work on it. Recently, he was on Tucker Carlson's show on X talking about the whole thing. Representative Thomas Massey from Kentucky has precipitated some of this and has brought some new video to light, along with Blaze Media and our friend Matt Peterson running the show over there. They're covering a lot of the tapes from January 6th and including the footage about the area around where this pipe bomb was discovered. And for those of you that don't remember, there was a pipe bomb allegedly placed outside the DNC. It became a pretext for all sorts of, at the very least, it was a welcome opportunity for the narrative about the insurrection to be more credible. Because if you're, playing around with pipe bombs, after all, it looks more like an insurrection and less like a protest that turned into a bit of a riot. Anyway, Darren's been covering this for a long time. He wrote for us a pretext for a Fedsurrection, which has been his description for this for a long time. Not that all of January 6th was completely run by the feds, but just that there was a lot of stuff we don't know about that day that still is left to be discovered. And Darren was covering this one part of it, which was the pipe bomb. And for those watching closely, it looks fishy from the beginning. I mean, the fact that they never found the guy that planted it. The fact that someone, they're now following geolocation data that's now years old to arrest thousands and thousands more people on January 6th. The fact that the geolocation data was not available or scrambled or lost or whatever. Read the piece. I asked Darren to write up this as crisp a summary as he could for people not really familiar with all of this. And Darren's conclusion for a long time has been, this was fake. This was a plan. It was a kind of false flag by the FBI or whomever. Now, I don't know one way or the other, but it certainly seems to me the evidence is mounting for this being a bit of a hoax. Who perpetrated the hoax and to what ends, we'll see. Maybe we'll never know. But the government's quick and the media's quick, immediate story of MAGA terrorists plant pipe bomb. Good, thank God it didn't kill anyone. Doesn't seem to hold up all that well. So if you want to refresh yourself on that, drawing on lots of other research and writing that Darren and others have been doing, do it at the American Mind and look up Pretext for Fedsurrection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I understand it, about a terabyte of data they're now saying in the House is missing or corrupted, which, I mean,
Maybe even 2.
Yeah.
The original description was that there were 4 terabytes, and I think the committee or committee members who took possession finally is more like 2 terabytes. So the question naturally arises for curious minds: what happened to the other 2 terabytes?
Where'd those
Why
terabytes
can't
go,
we see
guys?
them?
Yeah.
The dog ate them with the homework. It happens. DC's a big place.
It's
Who
right.
knows what actually
Terabytes
lives
go
in the
missing all the
bowels?
time. Yeah, who knows how many
Who knows?
terabytes there are wandering around Washington,
Yeah,
D.C.
have you been under the Capitol? There's so many tunnels. Who
It's
knows
just
where it is?
constant. It's true. Just terabytes everywhere. Yeah, I mean, I am not a data analytics expert, but by my calculations, a terabyte is a lot. It's a large amount of data. All right, we got to wrap this show up. This was a fun one. Thank you all for joining us. If you want to know more about the work that the Claremont Institute does, leading the charge, spearheading the effort, according to the New York Times, against DEI and all its subsidiary perversions, you can check out our various websites, not only AmericanMind.org, but also ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com and Claremont.org, newly relaunched, snazzy, spiffed up. So you should check that out especially. And if you want to donate to support our work, go to Claremont.org/donate. We really do appreciate that. And we funnel those funds directly into the work that we are doing. Finally, take a look at our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life, where a lot of our most political work happens. They're hot on the case of finding those missing terabytes with actual gumshoe magnifying glasses actually on the streets. No, that's not true. But it's dc.claremont.org to check out the work that they do. And if you want to support this show specifically, the best thing you can do is drop a 5-star rating wherever you're currently listening, or at the very least, keep whatever negative opinions you may have to yourself. Subscribe wherever you're listening right now, wherever you get your podcasts. We do one of these every week. Share it with your friends and family. Tweet about it. Post about it, X about it, or whatever. Just spread the word. Really helps to grow the audience. And that's it from us. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Logan Zappieri. And thanks to all of you for listening. We will talk to you next week.
Okay, now it's a new podcast. Today, it's work day. So, everyone go to school, play, take a nap, go to whatever school you're in, and all grown-ups go to work. Podcast over.